Okay, we're going to get started. And if you've joined us today, you have actually joined the first in a series of webinars that we're going to be running. And each webinar is going to give you a tool. Okay. And we're going to start out today with, I just want to stop the video there. Perfect. Okay. So the first tool we're going to give you today is you've joined us so that by the time you leave here, you're going to get a tool that will help you to decode emotions for calm and clarity, release mental weight using these 3 simple steps, transform your relationship with emotions. So we're hoping you're going to see emotions differently by the time you leave here. And we're going to be giving you some science-backed habits and tips to make you feel a little bit lighter. So there are 3 of us on the webinar today. And the 3 of us are all part of an organization called 6 Seconds. Avril, you can see, is a 6 Seconds partner for South Africa. And 6 Seconds is a global organization. And both Bongi and myself are accredited as assessors, facilitators, and practitioners. We actually trained under Avril when we first began. And the 3 of us are collaborating today to be able to share some tips and tricks. And we each have our own businesses. You can see Self Insights, EQ in Action, and Mila. But we want to be able to collaborate and really just raise the importance of emotional intelligence to the South African public. So I've got a poll which I'm going to launch. And I'd like you to be able to fill in on this poll. It's going to ask you a couple of questions, which we're going to refer to a little bit later. It's actually a survey that's used by Gallup. So please can I ask you to do the poll as we begin, and I will close the poll just now, but it's going to ask you a couple of emotions. Have you experienced any of these during the day yesterday? Please do fill in. And as I say, we're going to chat a little bit later about why we're asking you to do that poll. Okay. So I'm going to kick off, first of all, by asking you, if you've joined this webinar, you probably got caught by that one-liner that said, are you drowning in tension and overwhelmed by work? Okay. And if not, perhaps your colleagues are actually feeling that way. And I'm going to start with a question in the webinar today with, how are you feeling right now? Okay. On a scale of 1 is to 10, if 1 is flat and tired and 10 is energized, you're welcome to put your number in the chat if you'd like to. So we can sort of see what the scale of emotions are that we've got in the room here. But really, emotions can be a great source of energy, but they can also drain us. And what if your emotions could be used as a resource instead of as an enemy or something irrelevant or something overwhelming? And what if they could be used as a resource to help us to connect to both ourselves and each other, okay, in the workplace? So we promised you a simple science-backed strategy, a tool that you could use repeatedly that would help you to untangle and decode some of those overwhelming emotions and move from the sense of clarity to, from chaos towards clarity. And when you think of this state, what's one word that you would use to describe that state of calmness or clarity, the state that most of us are seeking? Okay? If you'd like to, you're welcome to put that in the chat. What's your one word for it? And as we read, maybe we're going to read a couple of those just now out of the chat, but there's one word that really, for me, resonates with me, and I thought it was a delightful word to share with you, that every culture has a word for this feeling of calm and clarity. In English, we kind of call it well-being or perhaps flourishing. I don't know what other words are in the chat there. Martin Seligman, he refers to it as flourishing. But there's one word, it's a Japanese word, which I really love. And it talks to an internal force of health. And that Japanese character that you see there has its roots in Chinese characters, and the thirst, energy, and spirit. And it talks to this force from inside. So I love that word genki, okay, describing it pretty beautifully. So if this is the state we're looking for, this flourishing, or what I'm saying is Japanese word genki, why are we struggling to find it? Okay, because we really are struggling to find it, and definitely in a work context, we are struggling to find it. So there are two things that are happening, although there's a lot of chaos in the world right now. There are two things that are happening simultaneously that I'm going to draw your attention to first. Okay, they are contributing to our struggle, and experts call it a meta crisis. And then I'm going to give you that context, and then Bongi's going to take over, and she's going to give you some insights for how this shows up in a workspace. Okay? And then Avril, thirdly, is then going to give you the tool that's going to help you untangle and encourage you really to just practice, practice, practice. So the two things that are happening simultaneously that I'm going to share with you really give you the context for your workplace. And they come from two reports. Okay, I've said to you, we all part of an organization called 6 Seconds, and they release a lot of data for us to use to be able to guide people with. And there are two reports they've released. One is the State of the Heart report, and the other is the Workplace Status report with EI and AI. And I'll make those available for you in the chat later during the webinar. But there are two bits of data. I'm going to take one from each of these reports to share with you. And as I said, I'll put it in the download for you. But from the first report, there is something happening in the world right now. And this graph shows you really quite clearly what is happening. And it shares that the scores on emotional intelligence have been declining for the last 4 years consecutively. So from 2019 to 2023 and now into 2024, they have declined. And every one of the individual competencies for EQ has also dropped. Okay. So this data is taken from EQ assessments that are done by 6 Seconds, and they go across different cultures, different countries, different generations, different genders, and there are so many insights that come out of this. But what they're really giving us in information is that there is an emotional recession. Okay, so we always talk about, the economic recession, but actually there's an emotional recession happening right now, and we're in it. And it's characterized by things like low well-being and high burnout. And that's really a lot of what's being experienced in the workplace. But what's happening at the same time? So I said I'm going to give you two bits of data. The other is that there is this AI revolution, okay, which means that AI is on the rise. The spend in AI is rocketing up. I mean, look at that between 2022 and 2023, just how much that has actually grown. And that AI revolution means maybe perhaps in your business, you're thinking, well, we're not spending any money on AI, but it's definitely impacting all of us. And the impact is, while this EQ is declining, we've got this revolution, this increased pace. And what it means in your world is probably that there's a lot of pressure to be productive and efficient, because AI can do a lot of what we're doing more efficiently and at half the speed, at half the time. So we need to be outperforming, and that's put a lot of pressure on people. And then there's also just this information overload, okay? Constant social media, constant comparisons, the news is a constant cycle. So it's really just turning the volume up for us on so many things. And this results in, so these two things happening simultaneously are resulting in the fact that we've got a lot of big feelings, right? And we're struggling to know how to work with them. And that's really, so it's this rise in the AI and the decline. And it's not only AI that's contributed to it. So we've got a lot of global issues right now, but these two together are causing rising stress, burnout, and loneliness. And although AI doesn't cause the emotional recession, it's definitely a massive contributing factor to that. So that's really where we find ourselves sometimes when we resonate with the image for the webinar, which was this one of being overwhelmed. So at the start, I asked you if you wanted to contribute to the poll, and I see there are a number of people that have contributed already. the question that I asked you in the poll was actually one used by Gallup. And Gallup asked this every single year across different countries, different generations, different workplaces. And they asked people if during the day, a lot of the day yesterday, did you feel any stress, worry, or anger or sadness? And I'm seeing stress come up a lot in the poll, which I'm going to share with you shortly, and Bungi's going to speak to it. But if you look at what the global response to this was that 40 in terms of stress, 44% of the people filling in said yes, they've definitely experienced a lot of stress. Then worry, you look at the worry there, 40% saying definitely, and that's the immediate, that's just yesterday. So this is the kind of, whether it's you or whether it's colleagues, whether you're leading others, you're operating in a place where people are feeling stressed, worried, angry, and sad. Okay. Gallup do another very interesting survey where they ask about what followers want from leaders. And this also gives us a really good indicator, because year on year, and they've been doing this for the last 20 years, okay, the one that comes up every time is hope. Right? So followers are looking for leaders who can offer them hope, trust, compassion, and stability. So that's really the ask. And how do we do this? Bungi's going to really now take over and chat to how these emotions drive people, people drive performance, and what does this actually look like. But before she does, I'm going to end the poll so that I can share it. Here are the results of those who participated in the poll. Okay, so can you see on the screen there? Bungi, can you see the results of the poll? Okay, perfect. So there we go, take over from there.
Thank you, Carey. This is very interesting data in the sense that it's starting to show us the similarities already from that Gallup data in terms of the survey that was done and what we're seeing today just in the population that we have in this presentation. So what we're going to focus on is to see how does this play itself with ourselves personally in terms of where we work, and as well how does it translate in terms of what we do on a daily basis. What we're seeing in our experience as AQ practitioners is where we see emotion-shaped performance, well-being, the culture, as well as our relationships in the workplace. Now, Carey mentioned earlier that we come from 6 seconds, and what's beautiful about 6 seconds methodology and our approach is that all the emotions matter because they give us information. Already that's a tool to say it is not a helpless situation. If you think about the stress and worry that is coming up as strongly, it's about understanding all of that and start saying, how can I use this emotion? So as I take you through how emotions shape our work, we need to help you understand that all of this comes from the idea of understanding that emotions from a place of where you're working on a project that you're very, very excited about, you can see how emotions are helping you to get engaged, to get you energized, to be curious about the work that you're doing. At the same time, there are those emotions like worry, stress, anger, loss. They are also equally important in the sense that they help you to say, what do I need to draw attention to in my life so that I can change the story? That is why we love so much the 6 seconds model, because it helps us to feel like there's something that we can do about these emotions. So now let's look at how emotions shape our work. If you think about your worry right now, what you've mentioned, some of you have mentioned stress and worry. How does that play itself when it comes to your performance? So one of the things, if we look at just worry, is that it can tend to impact your focus. So it's important to understand what's happening to you, how it impacts your work. Relationships, how am I interacting with others? Am I being, for example, impatient with Avril when we are discussing a project? So it's important to understand how it shapes our work, because we feel something and that feeling has an impact in terms of how we interact. And that feeling, for example, has an impact in our well-being. I'm experiencing burnout because of the worry that I'm going through, or overwhelm that I'm going through. And when we started to have this data, there's a sense of clarity that there's something that I can do about it. And from a culture perspective, these are the things that we see as EQ practitioners. Even cultural example, if the culture is toxic, where it's a punitive culture, it might be difficult for you to stand up and trust. If you think about that Gallup example that Carey mentioned, that everyone in the organization, based on that research, they are looking for leaders that bring in hope. So if the environment is punitive, you're going to feel helpless. And when you're helpless, you're not going to feel a sense of hope. So that is why we need to understand how emotions shape our work. Next slide. Thank you. What we're seeing, and again, in our levels as facilitators and coaches and practitioners, that tension consumes our mental energy. That impacts the level of concentration that we have. And what I want to make clear to everyone is that this is not a sign of weakness. All these emotions are not a sign of weakness. They are signal that there's an attention that we need to pay into these areas, that we're feeling a physical sensation that is uncomfortable, and there's something that can be done about it. So what is important is to understand what can be done. So I'll give you an example of one of the people that I've worked with as a coach, that she was finding that she's not making decisions. She's taking longer to make decisions. She's double checking her work. She's overthinking. And I'm sure you can relate to this as I continue. And that relates to procrastination. You find that you're not making the decision. And what I want to make clear is that it's not because you're not capable. And you know that at the deeper heart levels of how you think about this. But the doubt that comes with, what should I do? And it's even worse if the environment is toxic, that you will overdo your work because you're worried about, what if they say the work is not great and it impacts your performance? Can you see how now this pulls together? So the key thing here for me is to help you understand that it's not because there's a level of weakness. It's about what needs to be paid attention on, and that your system is overloaded when you're experiencing overwhelm. Next slide. Same thing with physical health, that it signals that if I'm experiencing burnout, as I mentioned earlier, your intrinsic motivation is going to drop. You're going to start to feel like you're not showing up for the work that you want to do. Again, one of the quick examples that I want to share with one of my experiences with my clients, where what came out was, because of the worry and the stress and the overthinking and overanalyzing and being fearful and worried about my work and other things that could be personal, she said, one of the things she said, I started not to focus on myself. And this is what we bring and strongly at 6 seconds, that's the time to say, what is my mental system that allows me to say, I see burnout, what does this mean and what can I do so that I can change my story? Next slide. So what's the risk? Why are we here? Why does this matter? Levels of, as Carey said, in the State of the Health report, levels of empathy have dropped. If you think where she was talking about some of the consequences that help us to build collaboration, they had dropped over the years. They continuously drop levels of empathy. And of course, if levels of empathy drop, conflict is going to increase, because I don't have time to listen to Carey and see her as a human being and work on a project constructively. So that's the risk that happens at individual and as well as at a team level. Same thing with at a culture level, that disengagement is what organization, from our experience doing this work in EQ training, that disengagement has gone up. I mean, there's even a term called the great detachment, where people are so detached in the organizational culture, also purely because of the culture that exists that is toxic in some cases. So I'll make a very quick example where I worked in an organization that it was extremely punitive. I mean, words useless and helpless will fly around the organization. And I remember working with this employee who experienced a panic attack because she was about to do a presentation on her brand plan. And it's not because she had not done the work. It was because I'm afraid, what if I've done something wrong? So I feel and understand your worry and stress. But what we're here today is to help you to say, how do I change the story? How do I find ways of having a fortitude that helps me to show up tomorrow and manage my world in a way that helps us to move my story forward? Next slide. So what's the point? The point is that overwhelm is not a state to endure. Absolutely not. It's not a space that we need to endure every day, that we need to persevere. But it's really critical data that signals for us to say, what do we need to change so that we can shape ourselves differently, so that we have a sense of clarity. And Avril is going to take us through these steps that are going to help us to say, how do we change the story? How do we show up in a way that helps us to feel a sense of clarity? Over to you, Avril.
So Carey and Bongs have posted quite a almost a dire picture of where we are right now. We are all feeling something right now as we sit here. We're feeling something. We all put how we were feeling in the poll as well. But what happens if every emotion we are experiencing is actually trying to give us data? It's trying to tell us something. You know, in moments of conflict, tension, or uncertainty, our emotions come to the surface. And yet, typically, as we have grown up, we've almost been taught to suppress them, more so in certain cultures, more so in certain genders, where it's taboo to actually talk about emotions and to express it. So when we're raising children that are not taught to express emotions, what happens is that we actually start to get adults who almost have a toxic relationship with emotions. They repress them, and these emotions then become harmful. They dull our senses, and eventually they build up and they actually overflow. And often what we do is we end up hurting the people that are closest to us because we don't know how to manage these emotions. But what about if we look at emotions and go, emotions aren't actually the problem? They're the messengers that we need to learn how to tangle or decode these messages and see them for what they are and not to see them as threats. So let's consider that we stop avoiding emotions and we learn to understand them. We need to befriend them, and we also need to stop vilifying certain emotions. If you look at the emotions on the right of the screen, we often see those emotions as being bad emotions. You know, hope is a good emotion, fear is a bad emotion, pride and shame. But these emotions are actually all on the same continuum. We can't experience the one without experiencing the other. So they're all part of the same. So what about if we start recognizing these emotions as being signals that they are telling us something, they data. When we see a robot, it's got, you know, red is to stop, caution is slow down, green is go. It's giving us information. Our emotions are exactly the same. So they're a feedback system that is delivering information, which is driving our behavior and our decisions, as Bongi mentioned, which is taking such a toll at the moment. So where and how do we start to unravel our emotions? Today, we're going to look at 3 simple steps. It's a basic tool that's going to help you to understand and untangle your emotion in order that you can start navigating your way through life from chaos to clarity. So let's look at the first step. Our first step is to start noticing the emotion. What is your body telling you? So as I said, we often avoid or suppress our emotions, but they're actually messengers. So our emotions are chemically based. So whether we like to admit it or not, we have these chemicals that are pumping through our body all the time. They're on every cell of our bodies, and they are affecting us. So think about the physical sensations that are created when you suddenly have that hot feeling. You know, somebody calls on you to answer something, you're not sure what it is, you can feel yourself getting all hot and flushed. Or maybe you can feel you starting to bite, you clenching your jaw. Your fists are held really, really tightly. Your stomach might be in a knot. Maybe you feel yourself going cold, or you get those tingly. Those are all physical sensations that are telling you something. They are a key to say, take notice, something is happening. So the first thing we've got to do is to actually stop and check in with ourselves and say, what is my body telling me right now? What is the sensation that is actually happening to me? So once I have noticed the emotion, what I need to do now is to start naming it. What is it that I'm actually feeling? Okay. And I don't know how many of you saw the Disney Pixar movie of EQ from the Inside Out. It is one of the most phenomenal, and there's been the follow-up as well, but one of the most phenomenal movies done on emotional intelligence. It is not a children's movie. They might enjoy the characters, but go and, if you haven't seen it, please do yourself a favor and do it. So we're going to look at what some of these emotions are actually telling us, because we need to be able to describe the emotion to ourselves. We need to be able to name it. So in some of the Disney characters, there are some of these basic emotions, and there's like a little emoji character for each emotion. And they are giving critical information about us. So when we consider if we're experiencing anger, anger is not a bad emotion. Anger is a signal that there is a perceived barrier. There's something blocking our way. Anxiety is a signal that there is an unknown challenge. Joy is a message about vitality. We want to embrace something. We want to move towards it. Disgust often occurs when things go against our value system. And it often leads to a behavior of rejection. Sadness when we're losing something that we really care about, or we've lost something that we care about. So every emotion is actually focusing our attention on either an opportunity or a threat. Joy asks in a bubbly way, are you noticing how great this is? It's really exciting. Fear is saying, are you noticing the danger in this? So our emotions are energizing us either to move forward towards the situation or to move back, to avoid it. So do we want to approach, or do we want to avoid? Joy motivates us to approach, while fear motivates us to avoid. So earlier, Bongi spoke about being overwhelmed. So what is this feeling of overwhelm? What does it actually mean? So Merriam-Webster defines it as being overcome by strong emotions or forces. It relates to a feeling, a sudden strong emotion when having too much to manage, and it describes a state of being unable to cope with the intensity or feeling of the situation. So when we start to unpack this, there is a mix of emotions. We don't just feel this overwhelm. We have multiple emotions that are happening at the same time. So we need to be able to understand and interpret them. So for me personally, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I almost get like a bit of a shake or a tremor where I'm almost like, whoo, you know, vibrating a little bit. And I battle to focus on any one task. I start to procrastinate. I start to almost run around like a chicken without a head. I don't know what to do first. I almost have this heavy feeling from my chest that starts to go up into my neck. And I kind of believe that I'm less capable of actually doing anything. I start to have feelings of failure, of anxiety, of stress. And part of this reason is because as much as, particularly as women, we like to say we are capable of multitasking, we actually can't, because our brains can only focus on one thing at a time. So when we are trying to deal with so many different things, it actually means that our brains are jumping from one task to the next. And that's where this overwhelm starts to build up. And we start to, either if the intensity is high, we start to feel this anxiety. If it's not as high, it might be a bit of unease, but eventually we start to lose that energy and it starts to drain us, and we start to feel tired, almost that sense of helplessness and depression. So it's seldom that we ever only feel one emotion at a time. And that's where Robert Plutchik developed this amazing model of emotions in 1980. And Carey's also shared the link to it. And I really recommend people copy this link because it is an interactive model. So you can click on any of the emotions and it'll actually give you a description on them. So how the model works is if you picture it as a flower with petals, the end of the petal, or the lighter colors that you can see on the screen, is the least intense. As it moves to the middle or the center of this flower or cone, the intensity increases. So here we can see we've got an emotion of annoyance. So how do we notice it? Remember, first tool in our kits is how do we notice it? We start to feel slightly agitated. We might get that feeling of unease. We start having that clenching or any of those physical symptoms that I mentioned to you. And then we need to name it. What is this feeling? I'm frustrated, I'm prickly, I'm irritated, irritable. We start to build on this emotional vocab of what we're actually feeling. Then we need to look at what is this emotion actually telling me, there is a message in what it's telling me, and that's the message that we need to decode. But if you look briefly at this model, you will actually see that it is also talking about that continuum, because on the one end where we may have sort of distraction, if you look at the blue petal there in the bottom on the right, there's distraction. If you go across to the opposite end, the opposite of that is interest and anticipation. So again, we're showing that these emotions are not good or bad. They are information. And in between those petals, you will see other descriptive words. And these are secondary and tertiary emotions. So we have this mix of emotions all the time. And when we start to name these emotions and understand the emotions, what we're actually doing as well is that we are using our thinking brain to do it. So we are feeling, we're naming it, and now we're interpreting it, which is really the basic definition of emotional intelligence, which is being smarter with our feelings. So as we start to look at this model, and as I say, you can go onto the model on that link and you can click on any of the words that are there, and it'll give that the description, the name, and the feeling about it. And then we can start to look at how do we use this feeling. So this leads us on to step 3 of our tool. How do we navigate? What are our feelings actually telling us? So instead of pushing these emotions away, instead of seeing them as bad, or I shouldn't be feeling them and suppressing them, what about if we actually started treating them as allies? What are they actually telling me? Big feelings mean we're perceiving a big threat or opportunity. So what is the mix of emotions that we're actually experiencing here? So if we think of what was overwhelmed telling us, okay, if we now look at it, overwhelm is telling us keep it simple and focus on what matters. That's not always that easy when we're swamped and we're becoming stuck or almost paralyzed in what we're doing. We actually don't know what to do, okay? But using this feeling of overwhelmed as data, we now know that we need to focus on something. It's telling us something. So if we look now, what is the message for me in this overwhelm? Okay, it's telling me that I need to slow down. Okay, I need to slow down. I need to prioritize, and I need to start focusing on what really matters. So think about what were some of the physical symptoms that you were experiencing when you were overwhelmed. Okay, we needed to notice that, because once we notice our physical state, we can also start to change the physical state. So we can go from this feeling of where, our shoulders are up here and we're clenching our fists and we're really biting down. I know when I'm very stressed, I actually wake up with a very, very sore jaw. And even if we're in a meeting and we can feel this fluster starting, we can take that notice and we can start to say, what do I do with it? How do I navigate that physical sensation into something that will benefit me more? So we need to actually start slowing down our breathing. We need to start relaxing our body and taking that notice. I've noticed what it is. I've acknowledged it. And now how do I start to shift it from the physical aspect? So then again, when we think about when we were naming that emotion, okay, what is it that we're feeling? So when we're experiencing a bit of worry and it becomes a bit more of an anxiety, the right dose of anxiety is actually good for us. It's actually been proven that not enough stress and anxiety is just as unhealthy for us. So when we feel a bit of anxiety, it's telling us we need to be prepared. It pushes us to prepare for something, to look at the risks and be aware of what's coming so that we are able to deal with it. The risk lies in when we start oversizing it, when we allow it to become really large and really destructive. Because then what happens, it can push us into our survival brain where we are going into the fight, freeze, or flee. Now we can't navigate and we really battle with it. But in that tool of the naming, the minute we name the emotion, we recognize the emotion that we are feeling. It is proven scientifically that the intensity drops. So it comes down and it is now something manageable that I can deal with. Now look at what I do with this. So if I'm a leader and I can notice where my team are going, I notice they're overwhelmed. In order to safeguard my team's well-being, I need to identify they're overwhelmed, recalibrate, refocus, and possibly realign their priorities. So we have this really incredible model that is up on the screen there. And it's about using this model to see how emotions give us cues for navigating the world around us. They tell us who to trust, who to respect, who or what to avoid. It also gives us information about ourselves. You know, what is moral, reasonable, what will create growth. They indicate to us when to approach and when to avoid. So when I mentioned joy earlier, if you look at where joy is sitting and you look at those emotions, they are on the right of the feeling log. If you look at the horizontal axis, you see it goes from a state of low pleasantness to high pleasantness. So unpleasant to highly pleasant. On the vertical axis, it goes from being low intensity to high intensity. So when I'm in quadrants 3 and 4, which are a high or moderate pleasantness, and either a high or a low intensity, it means I can approach the situation, that I can move towards it. When I'm in the quadrants 1 and 2, and it is lower pleasantness, I tend to move away. That's when fear was saying, be careful, withdraw, stand back. Joy was saying, let's approach, let's move closer. So our emotions are motivators. They're telling us to take action and also when not to take action. So if you consider overwhelmed, is overwhelm telling you to move towards, to take more action? Or could it maybe be saying it's a moment of pause and reflection now? So we need to recognize that in order to know what to do with it and how to navigate it. We also can't just stay in one quadrant. The whole art of navigating our emotions is that we are able to move freely between the 4 quadrants. But now, what happens if I tell you that the emotions we are feeling are also impacting what we are focusing on? So if we start to look at the 4 quadrants differently now, and sorry, they did actually reverse themselves. So I'm sorry if you're looking at the left and the right. But these quadrants, depending on the quadrant that we are in, we are able to focus on different things. So to give you an example, when I'm in quadrant 2, okay, which is the low intensity, low pleasantness, this is where I focus on minor issues, all right? For any of my clients out there, this is when you're going to start getting emails from me. You're going to start getting invoices. I'm going to do my admin, okay? When I need to be creative and write a newsletter, develop a new workshop, I need to be in the high pleasantness, high intensity, so in quadrant 4. When I am facilitating, particularly when I'm coaching, I need to be building trust, which means I need to be feeling the emotions that were sitting in quadrant 3, you know, the low intensity, high pleasantness. So you're probably wondering, so what is this really scary quadrant 1, this high intensity, high unpleasantness? What is the value in it? Well, this is when we fix big problems. This is when we tackle big problems. Think about your firefighters, your emergency room personnel, your ER doctors. That is where they spend a lot of their time and they solve massive big problems. So we need to learn to navigate through these quadrants. What about for you as a leader? What about when you notice the behaviors that are starting to come out, that people are becoming nitpicky, that they are lacking creativity, they're not building trust? As Bongi said, that empathy was dropping. We need to recognize that means they're sitting in a particular quadrant. And as a leader, you will have the most ability to shift the emotions of a team because of emotional contagion. The person with most positional power or the most intense emotions will be able to move people. So you need to then move through your own authenticity and your own authentic movement of feelings. You need to shift your emotions to say, what emotion would serve me best? So when you're going to chair a meeting, or you need to do a coaching session or a KPI review with someone, you need to consciously think, what emotion will serve me best right now? And you need to shift. Learn to recognize the emotion you're feeling at the moment. How do I need to be feeling? Because what is the result that I actually want from this? So it again is about being intentional. So our feelings are actually our most genuine paths to knowledge. So if we look at this quote by Andre Lord, I want you to really focus on that quote and say, our feelings are most genuine paths to knowledge. So every emotion that we have, remember, they are chemicals, we have them, we have these tools that we don't even realize, okay? So when we repress them, they are harmful, they dull our senses. The other thing that can happen, and it's actually a term that psychologist Stephen Hayes termed called goodism. When we suppress our emotions and we don't use them cleverly, in other words, we're not practicing our emotional intelligence, we actually start to do things like we might gamble, we may turn to alcohol, sex, excessive shopping, medication, all of the things that we think will help to avoid our emotions, to keep the dull on the emotion so that we don't actually have to take the signals that we've got. So this skill of accurately naming and understand our emotions is actually the basic building block for emotional intelligence. And being able to develop emotional literacy is really critical to move from this chaos to clarity. It is about emotional literacy, is about accurately identifying and appropriately expressing feelings. There's often a saying that says, don't teach your children not to be angry, teach them how to be angry. So emotional literacy, when you think about when you first go to school, children are taught math skills, they're taught basic linguistic skills. So the word literacy means knowing the letters and words and sounds for communication. So emotional literacy means knowing the words that make up our emotional vocab. This competency allows us to sort out our feelings and is really the start on the model that you will see there, which is the model that we use as 6 seconds, which is about self-awareness, self-management, and self-direction and purpose. When we can start to develop each of these muscles, and I've touched on the muscle today of emotional literacy, as we build those muscles, we start to develop our emotional intelligence. And as we do this, we can start to take more ownership for our behavior. We can become more effective. We're more purposeful. We have healthier relationships, and we lead healthier lives, better balance, better life satisfaction. All of those things that we looked at in the beginning that were identified as being a crisis for us.
One of the things that we wanted to share with you is the fact that we're going to be having these webinars on a regular basis. So this is one of the many that are coming through. But as part of us creating these webinars, we would like you to be part of this process, that you co-create these ideas with us. So what we'd appreciate is that you type on the chat some of the ideas that you have, or the topics that you want us to tap into, or the challenges that you've identified in the workplace that you would like us to unpack as part of us supporting you in your journey, where you are building emotions as a strategic resource in your day-to-day engagement. So we'd really like you to type in the chat and share that information. We're going to be having more webinars coming through. You can also give us feedback in terms of what you would like to see more of, that you'd like us to do to make sure that these webinars are really engaging and are helping you to not just to get information, but to transform what you'd like to see more of. Please type in the chat. We will also give you some time to ask questions just now, but we'd really appreciate as we continue that you type in and share us what is it that you'd like to see.
Thank you, Bongi, and thank you, Avril, for sharing. The 3 steps that Avril took you through, you can actually, we've got a 1-page summary of those 3 steps. So you can either download it directly now by using your phone and just going straight to the QR code. Otherwise, I'm just going to copy it now and paste it into the chat. You can also download it directly from there. It is a 6 seconds tool. So if you follow any of us on LinkedIn or on Facebook, Instagram, 6 seconds themselves, this tool, you'll see their logo at the bottom. It's one that they shared on LinkedIn that I picked up and thought, oh, wow, this is a useful tool to actually create a webinar around because it's practical. And the work starts now. So the reality is, with overwhelm, there's so much happening. We want to take small little chunks, take one thing and just begin with it. And Avril has spoken and gone through the notice, name and navigate tool. There also are the links in the chat to the reports that I shared with you, which are there. And just begin small and practice, practice, practice. So yes, we can't raise your emotional intelligence completely in 1 hour, but we can definitely give you this one takeaway, which is, as Avril said, the building block for emotional literacy, which if you don't know how to name an emotion, so first notice it, then name it, then you can actually navigate it. And that name it to tame it, if you, it's the real truth of when we talk about science-backed is that they've put the little scanners on people's heads with a huge emotion, like something like overwhelmed. And when people actually name it and they say, I'm feeling overwhelmed, it actually literally takes that. It's called closing your brain over. And that's something else. We'll maybe do a webinar just on that, because that really gives you some very valuable data. So prioritize and take the one tool and practice. We are going to probably later in June, we'll have a second webinar. And if you would like to join these, then please, we're going to send out a follow-up to those who joined today. And in that, we will give you the dates of our webinar in June. And that's going to be to do with when feelings get the better of you, okay, because they do. And it's called an emotional hijack. And we're going to do something on that and give you, again, one tool that you can go away and practice. So the 3 of us, we all write blogs. We've got lots of tips and tricks. So if you would like the updates, please subscribe. There are also lots of 6 seconds run free EQ webinars. And those are hosted all at different times by different people all over the world. And it's free for you to join. So we'll send you an email, but please follow the links and sign up so that you can stay informed as to what's happening.